My name is Ricky Minton. I'm a doctoral candidate for Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. This is my second academic presentation. This presentation is uh, on church violence, the historical and contemporary perspectives, the causes and the impacts, and prevention uh, of this violence. In the past few weeks, and months, we've had so much violence, so many mass shootings, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the attempt on our president's life back a few months ago have all been on my heart and mind and uh, gave me the direction through prayer and study to do this presentation on this subject. We'll start out with an introduction and define some of the terminology and things that's in this presentation. Church violence is defined as acts of physical, psychological, or symbolic aggression occurring within, perpetrated by, or directed against Christian church communities and institutions. It represents a complex phenomenon with significant historical and contemporary relevance. This presentation, this paper aims to provide a comprehensive examination of church violence, exploring its multifaceted nature through historical analysis, typological classification, casual investigation, and evaluation of some of the consequences. The study further brings in theological, social, and psychological perspectives while considering institutional and community responses and prevention strategies. The significance of this topic lies in its implications for religious freedom, community cohesion, and the role of faith institutions in promoting peace and persecution. Hostility and violence against churches in America is at an all-time high. According to a recent Family Research Council report, they documented more than 430 incidences in 2023, more than double the number in 2022. That's an 800% increase in incidences since 2018, and an average of 39 attacks every month. And still in 2025, we're seeing every month, we're seeing a mass shooting or arson or theft or some kind of violence that's occurring within the faith-based community. We'll also touch on some of the member to member, clergy to member incidences that would very much fall under the heading of violence that occurs in some of these. The Roman Catholic Church and their priest problems with sexual uh, acts, especially against underage children, and acts of many of our Protestant religions where pastors have had affairs or relations with members or church staff in many situations. The numbers from January 2023 through November 2023 are as follows. Gun related, there was 10. Arson related, 75. Vandalism, 315. Bombings, 20. And other uh, instances would be 37. Those numbers are terrible, but it's probably likely that there's much, much worse because many, especially smaller churches, might not report uh, theft, violence, um, graffiti on their walls because of a family related to members or just not wanting to get involved in the situation and bring their self in the spotlight. Historical overview of church violence. Uh, we saw violence against the church in the early churches in the first century. It dates back to the earliest days of Christianity. In the Roman Empire, Christians faced systemic persecution with instances such as the martyrdom of Stephen and the brutal suppression of Christian gatherings. These acts were often sanctioned by the government, by the state, and reflected political suspicion and certainly religious intolerance within the government. Stephen was the first Christian martyr chosen as one of the first deacons of the early church in Jerusalem. He was accused of blasphemy for his teachings about Jesus and was stoned to death by an angry mob. According to Tacitus, an early historian, the first wave of organized persecution occurred under Nero during the years 54 through 68, who blamed Christians for the Great Fire of Rome in 1964. A number of mostly localized persecutions occurred during the reign of Marcus Aurelius from the years 161 through 180. In the first century, Christians were crucified, just as Jesus was crucified. They were burned, they were thrown to the wild animals, they were stoned, all for simply just proclaiming the name of Christ. This was a period of immense persecution. If Christians wanted to survive, they had to hide out from the governing authorities. It seems like they might have had it a little worse then than we actually do today. There was much biblical evidence that persecution existed in the first century. The following is a list of biblical evidence for its existence. Jesus taught that his disciples would be persecuted. Paul taught that Christians should expect to suffer. And at Paul's conversion, certainly he suffered tremendous physical and emotional, mental situations. Persecution is a significant theme in the entire New Testament. During the medieval era, we saw internal and external conflicts. The medieval period witnessed both types of violence involved in the church family. Internally, disputes over doctrine, authority, and reform. There was excommunications, and at times there was violent confrontations. We see some of those in the investor controversy. The investor controversy was a conflict between the church and the state in Europe over the ability to choose and install bishops and abbots that were in charge of monasteries, and even the Pope himself. It started in the year 1076 and ended in the year 1124. The iconoclastic controversy was a dispute over the use of religious images in the Byzantine Empire in the 8th and 9th centuries. The iconoclast who rejected the images objected to this veneration for several reasons, including the Old Testament prohibition against images in the Ten Commandments. They related these images to idolatry and the problems that we saw, and the fact that there should be no idols before us, interfering with our worship of the one true God. The defenders of these icons insisted on symbolic nature of images and the dignity of a created matter, kind of a liberal, medieval liberal situation. Next, we see the Reformation and religious wars. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century stands as a watershed moment in church violence. The period was marked by violent clashes between Catholic and Protestant factions, including the 30 Years' War from 1618 through 1648, which devastated large parts of Europe. Churches and their members were often both perpetrators and victims of violence as doctrinal disputes spilled into broader political and social conflict. 5 of the most violent moments of the Reformation were the German Peasants' War from the year 1525. Martin Luther was involved in some of this. The end of the Kingdom of Munster in the year 1536. This was a Reformation inspired anarchy that returned to the Holy Roman Empire. The massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day in the year 1572 was one of the most notorious episodes of religious violence of this Reformation era. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. This was actually a series of wars and is sometimes remembered as the last of the wars of religion. Christian violence against non-Christians, as the historian Nicholas Terpstra recently argued, the Reformation era drive for purity was turned not only against rival Christian denominations, but also against non-Christian populations. Next, we have the modern era, which is what we're looking at even today, and we'll look at some forms and context. In the modern era, church violence has taken on a new dimension, from anti-Christian programs in various regions to internal abuses such as clerical, sexual misconduct, institutional cover-ups. The 20th and 21st centuries have also seen attacks on churches by terrorist groups, hate crimes, and the targeting of church communities in religions of political instability. I am a Billy Graham chaplain, one of their rapid response team chaplains, and one of my duties is being called to mass shootings and acts of violence, to do death notifications and counseling, and just be on location for prayer and anything that we can do to help the victims of these. It's such a prevalent situation that there are just not enough chaplains to handle all of our situations that's involved in this. Echoing its founder's nonviolence, the Christian faith initially grew as a nonviolent spiritual movement of counter-imperial values. It promoted love, not war. Its primal creed elevated solidarity, not oppression and exclusion. The early Christians elevated the quality of friendship rather than the supremacy of hierarchy. This commitment to nonviolence rapidly eroded in the early 4th century when the Emperor Constantine declared Christianity was the religion of the empire. This led to an acceptance of violence and domination against the empire's enemy, but also perceived enemies from within. Today, the abuse of Christians by Christians tends to be more emotional and spiritual than physical. Religious violence is undergoing a revival. The past decade has witnessed a sharp increase in violent, sectarian, or religious tensions. These range from Islamic extremists waging global jihad and power struggles between the Sunni and Shia Muslims in the Middle East to persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar and outbreaks of violence between Christians and Muslims across Africa. According to the Pew, in 2018, more than a quarter of the world's countries experienced a high incidence of hostilities motivated by religious hatred, mob violence related to religion, terrorism, and harassment of women for violating religious codes. The spike in religious violence in global and affects virtually every religious group. Next, we'll look at some types of church violence. Those include internal and external violence. Internal violence can come from physical violence, assaults, abuse, and even murder occurring within the church community, including clergy on clergy or member on member incidences. Psychological violence, which is manipulation, intimidation, emotional abuse, and coercion within church settings, often linked to leadership or doctrinal enforcement. Symbolic violence, which is the marginalization, exclusion, or stigmatization of dissenting members, minorities, or those with differing beliefs. Clergy abuse happens when a pastor, an elder, or anyone in a church position of authority uses his position to bully, intimidate, and/or exploit someone in his care. Like any other forms of abuse, most clergy abuse is rooted in greed or for power and control. We see less than 10% believe that they are experiencing more hate crimes today than they were 2 years ago. 50% believe or strongly agree or just agree to work being more challenging than it was 2 years ago. Yet it's now not clear which aspects of work have become more challenging. Males were more likely to be threatened or undertaking pastoral work, while women were more likely to be threatened by an active church member or parishioner. 35% agree or disagree that they are expecting more hate crime today than 2 years ago. That seems low to me. I would have thought it would have been higher. Older respondents seem to agree that there is less respect for clergy now than 2 years ago. That probably is true of police officers, military, or anyone else in uh, an authority or power position. Men are more likely to disagree with the statement that work has become more challenging in the last 2 years. 68% of the people have experienced verbal abuse, while 19% and 10% have experienced threatening or violent behavior. 83 people of the survey that was done said that they had been threatened in the last 2 years. 90% of these had been threatened with personal harm, while 20% had a relative threatened, and 35% had experienced threats to church property. External violence, we see attacks on churches, arsons, bombing, shootings, and vandalisms perpetrated by individuals or groups opposed to church teachings or presence. Persecution and discrimination, the systemic targeting of churches and Christians by state actors, rival religious groups, or social movements. Church shootings are becoming an increasing threat to the religious community of America. The United States Justice Department has determined that 13.3% of all hate crimes are now based on religion. That's a striking statistic considering how unprotected churches are to the threats of an active shooter. Some causes and contributing factors are theological disputes, social tensions, political influences, and psychological triggers. Some of the theological disputes go back to doctrinal disagreements, and they have historically been fueled by internal and external violence. The Christian church has long been marked by theological controversy. We see that very much so today. Many of the apostolic letters were written to combat false teaching that had crept into the early church. We see those from Paul. Almost every letter that Paul wrote was directed at one of the churches and some internal problems that they were having. Social tensions. Churches often exist at the intersection of social divisions ethnic, racial, class, and gender. Tensions within these domains can manifest into violence, especially when church policies or practices are perceived as exclusionary or oppressive. Some political influences in church violence. Political actors have long exploited religious institutions for power, leading to violent confrontations. Churches may be targeted for their perceived alignment with a particular regime or opposition movements, or may themselves incite violence to further their political aims. Attacks on churches in the United States have nearly tripled in the last 4 years, and many have political motivations. Evangelical activist groups think the think take from evangelical activist groups, among others, forms of attacks are symptomatic of a collapse in social reverence and respect for houses of worship and religion. The lack of respect of oneself, of the community, of government, of pastors, of churches is a major problem in today's world. Psychological triggers, group dynamics, charismatic leadership, and psychological vulnerabilities contribute to violent behavior within church communities. The phenomenon of groupthink, as well as unresolved trauma or mental illnesses among members, can escalate conflicts into violence. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon in which people strive for consensus within a group. In many cases, people will set aside their own personal beliefs or adopt the opinions of the rest of the group. The term was first used in 1972 by social psychologist Irving Janis. Some impacts and consequences on church violence we see are the effects on individuals. Victims of church violence, whether physical, psychological, or symbolic, often experience profound trauma, loss of faith, and social isolation. Clergy and lay people alike may suffer from guilt, shame, and long-term mental health effects. The effects on communities. Church violence can fracture communities, erode trust in religious leadership, and diminish the church's role as a moral and social anchor. In some cases, entire denominations have been destabilized by scandals or violent incidences. Community violence, according to Christianity, is recognized as a significant source of trauma affecting individuals and communities, particularly in places like South Africa. I live in a very small town, and we're seeing the same situation uh, affect some of our church denominations who have come out in support of homosexual lifestyles and homelessness and many other social platforms that the church will take a stand on. Some broader social consequences. The widespread church violence can contribute to societal polarization, undermine respect for religious freedoms, and fuel cycles of retaliation and mistrust. Without the sense of moral dependence upon or obligation to Christ, a society lacks the moral reality of the church. Some spiritual and emotional repercussions. Beyond material consequences, church violence often leads to spiritual crises, questioning of faith, and the loss of communal identity, and difficulties in forgiveness and reconciliation. Some theological perspectives. We see some religious teachings on violence. Christian doctrine generally condemns violence, emphasizing peace, forgiveness, and reconciliation. We see scriptural passages such as the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 7, which advocate nonviolence and love of enemies. However, historical interpretations have sometimes justified violence, such as in the context of the just war theory or punitive discipline. The just war theory is a largely Christian philosophy that attempts to reconcile three things. The taking of human life is seriously wrong, that states have the duty to defend their citizens and defend justice, and protecting innocent human life and defending important moral values sometimes requires willingness to use force. The social and psychological analysis of church violence, we see some group dynamics. Church communities exhibit complex groups of dynamics with hierarchies, in-group or out-of-group distinctions, and collective identities. These dynamics can foster solidarity, but also exclusion and rivalry, sometimes escalating into violence. We see trauma and healing. The psychological impact of church violence is profound, often requiring special pastoral care and mental health interventions. Trauma can be compounded by the betrayal of a trusted spiritual leader or institution. The role of leadership and the community within the church, within church violence. Leadership style and community culture significantly influence the likelihood and response to violence. Authoritarian or charismatic leaders may incite or conceal violence, whereas transparent, participatory leadership can foster prevention and healing. We see some contemporary case studies, attacks on churches in the United States, and some statistics of these church attacks in the United States are between 1999 and 2023, over 2,000 violent incidences occurred on faith-based organizations. 40% of church violence incidences involve personal disputes that escalate on church property. 27% of church attacks are robbery related. Fewer than 10% of churches have a formal security plan in place to respond to violent threats. Some responses to church violence and some prevention strategies. Church policies and safeguards. Many denominations have implemented policies for the prevention and response to violence, including child protection protocol, codes of conduct, and training in conflict resolution. External audits, transparency, and accountability mechanisms are increasingly common. How to make your church less vulnerable. Never allow staff to work alone. Establish an internal distress code that will alert others in your office for the need of assistance. Keep all church doors locked except when in use, and limit access points as much as possible. Make sure all church staff members know of and understand the church's security plan. In conclusion, church violence in its many forms and contexts possess significant challenges to faith-based communities, to the society, and to the pursuit of peace and justice. Through historical analysis, typological exploration, and interdisciplinary inquiry, I have tried to highlight the complexity of church violence. I've looked at its causes, its impacts, and some potential remedies to some of this. Addressing church violence requires a multifaceted approach. It combines theological reflection, social and psychological insight, and practical prevention strategies. Future research should further examine the interplay of cultural, legal, and spiritual factors and prioritize the voices and needs of the most affected. In conclusion, I would like to state that this is obviously a problem that is not going to go away. It is compounding on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis, and the church should take direction and even leadership in trying to solve some of the problems that we have around church violence. Uh, Thank you very much for listening, and God bless, and have a good day.